She thought she won when she humiliated the man in front of the whole street. Sarcasm, pride, and likes were her weapons. But when men in black suits knocked on her door, her triumph turned into a nightmare. And it was only the beginning. It was one of those crisp mornings in a small, bustling American town where the world felt like it hadn't had its first coffee yet. The sun was just starting to pour over the quaint little cafe tables lined up along the sidewalk. The smell of freshly brewed espresso mingled with the sound of car engines and chatter from early commuters. Christina Wright, 37, self-proclaimed activist and part-time chaos enthusiast, stood by the corner, scanning the street like a hawk looking for its next meal. To her, the world was one big battleground of social justice, and she was the self-appointed general. Her days revolved around her phone, capturing every injustice she could spot, uploading it, and waiting for the likes and validation to roll in. Her sharp eyes landed on a man in his 50s, sitting alone at a corner table. He was broad-shouldered, with a calm, no-nonsense demeanor, the kind that screamed, "Don't mess with me." He wore a red cap with bold white letters, "Make America Great Again." Christina's pulse spiked, like she'd just downed a double shot of espresso. That cap was her ultimate trigger, a neon sign of everything she despised. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she clenched her phone, already imagining the headline, "Local hero stands up against hateful propaganda." Another one of those, she muttered under her breath, rolling her eyes so hard it was a miracle they didn't get stuck. Thinks he can just flaunt that around like it's 1950 or something. Meanwhile, the man, Thomas Garner, was completely unaware of the storm brewing just feet away. He was engrossed in his newspaper, occasionally taking a sip of his coffee, exuding an air of quiet confidence. Christina's indignation boiled over. She flipped her phone to camera mode and started recording, narrating in her best righteous indignation voice. "This," she whispered into the camera, "is exactly what's wrong with this town. People like him think they can just sit here, spreading their hateful agenda like it's no big deal." But recording wasn't enough. Not today. Today, she needed action. Pocketing her phone, she stormed across the sidewalk, her heels clicking like a countdown to impact. Thomas barely looked up when she approached. He was used to the occasional sideways glance his cap attracted, but didn't expect what came next. Without warning, Christina pulled out a small canister of pepper spray and unleashed it directly into his face. "This is for everyone you've ever offended," she declared, with the dramatic flair of someone auditioning for a soap opera. Thomas recoiled, his newspaper flying out of his hands as he gasped for air, clutching his burning eyes. "What the—" he choked, stumbling back in his chair. The cafe erupted. People froze, unsure of what had just happened. A couple of bystanders rushed to Thomas's side, offering water and tissues. Others whipped out their phones, capturing the scene for their own social media accounts. Christina stood tall, arms crossed, a triumphant smirk on her face. She looked around at the gathering crowd, basking in the attention. "You're welcome," she said to no one in particular, as if she'd just single-handedly solved world hunger. And with that, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving behind a chaotic mix of concerned whispers and angry mutters. Thomas, still coughing and trying to clear his eyes, sat hunched over as a young barista frantically poured water onto a napkin. "Sir, are you okay? Should we call the police?" Thomas shook his head, his voice hoarse. "No, I'll handle this." But as he sat there, his mind raced. The moment was captured on dozens of phones. He could already feel the ripple effects coming, and not just for Christina. Christina, on the other hand, was already uploading her video, convinced she'd just scored the moral victory of the century. Little did she know, this was only the beginning. Thomas Garner's face burned, his eyes stinging as if they were on fire. He took a few shaky breaths, gripping the cafe table for balance. A young man rushed over, pulling a water bottle out of his backpack. "Sir, here, use this," the guy said, unscrewing the cap and handing it over. Thomas tilted his head back, pouring the water over his face. Relief was instant, but brief. He coughed, still struggling to clear the pepper spray from his lungs. "Do you want me to call the police? That lady was crazy," the young man asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Thomas held up a hand. "No need. I'll take care of it." The man hesitated, but nodded, stepping back as a small crowd gathered around. The buzz of conversations grew louder. "This is unacceptable," said one man in a suit, "attacking someone for a hat. What's wrong with people?" Another woman shook her head. "This is crossing the line. You don't have to agree with him, but this? It's disgusting." Thomas straightened up, his composure returning. Despite the chaos around him, he projected an air of quiet authority. "Thank you, everyone," he said, his voice steady though still rough. "I appreciate the concern, but I'll handle this privately." As he walked away, Thomas knew this wasn't over. The incident was captured on too many phones, and the story was already spreading. Christina Wright, meanwhile, was riding a wave of satisfaction. Back home, she uploaded the video she'd filmed at the cafe, adding a triumphant caption, "Standing up to hate, one MAGA hat at a time." The views poured in almost instantly, along with a flood of comments. "Finally, someone with guts," wrote one user. "Is this what justice looks like now?" asked another. Amid the praise, a different tone began creeping into the comment section. "Do you even know who that guy is? That's Thomas Garner. Look him up. Big mistake." "Not a good move, Christina," she scoffed, dismissing the comments as trolls, but the name Thomas Garner kept appearing, and curiosity got the better of her. A quick search made her stomach drop. Thomas Garner was no ordinary man. The articles painted a clear picture. Retired U.S. general, highly decorated, and widely respected. Christina froze, her confidence replaced with creeping dread. "This can't be real," she whispered to herself. Later that evening, a black SUV pulled up in front of her house. The car idled for a moment before two men in dark suits stepped out. They moved with purpose, their expressions unreadable as they approached her door and rang the bell. Christina, still glued to her phone, barely looked up as she opened the door. "What's—" "Miss Wright?" one of the men asked, holding up a badge. Her heart sank. "Yes." "You need to come with us," he said, his tone firm. "What? Why? What's going on?" The second man stepped forward. "This isn't optional, ma'am. Let's go." Christina's confidence evaporated. She glanced back at her phone, where her video was still racking up views. For the first time, she regretted pressing upload. Christina Wright sat stiffly in a stark, windowless room. The walls were a muted gray, the air heavy with an unshakable tension. Her hands fidgeted on the table in front of her, the polished metal surface cold against her skin. This wasn't some casual chat at a coffee shop. It felt more like a scene from a high-stakes movie, and she was playing the role of the villain. The door opened with a quiet click, and in walked two men. One was instantly recognizable, Thomas Garner, now dressed in a sharp navy suit, his commanding presence filling the room. Beside him stood another man, his face set in a look that practically screamed, "Don't mess with me." Christina's confidence wavered, but she forced herself to sit upright, her jaw tightening. "Miss Wright," Thomas began, his voice calm but laced with authority. "Do you know who I am?" She raised her chin defiantly, her inner bravado making one last stand. "Yeah, you're the smug MAGA guy I dealt with this morning. You're welcome, by the way." Thomas let out a low, humorless chuckle, shaking his head slightly. "Interesting perspective. Let me clarify. I'm General Thomas Garner, retired commander of the United States Armed Forces. And this morning, you attacked not just me, but a representative of this nation's security." Christina's bravado crumbled, her face went pale, and her breathing quickened. "Wait, what?" "You heard me," he said, leaning forward slightly, his gaze piercing. "Your reckless actions not only endangered me, but also revealed your complete disregard for basic rights and civility." Her mind raced, grasping for some way out of this spiraling nightmare. "Look, I didn't know who you were. It was just the hat, okay? People like you." "People like me?" Thomas interrupted, his voice sharp now. "Let me tell you something, Miss Wright. You don't get to define people based on your narrow view of the world. You let anger guide your actions, and now you're facing the consequences." The room was silent except for the ticking of a clock somewhere in the background. Christina felt like the walls were closing in. What happens now?" she stammered. Thomas stood, adjusting his suit jacket. His voice was steady, but carried the weight of finality. "That depends on you. I'm not asking for retribution. I'm asking for accountability. You will issue a public apology, not for me, but for the message your actions sent. This country deserves better." The aftermath hit like a tidal wave. Christina's video, once celebrated by her followers, became a lightning rod for criticism. Clips of the café incident went viral, but this time, the narrative wasn't in her favor. Local activist attacks respected general justice or harassment, read one headline. The comment sections were brutal. "Is this what activism looks like now? Shameful." She didn't even know who he was, reckless and ignorant. This is why we can't have civil conversations anymore. Christina's social media accounts were flooded with backlash. The likes and shares she once craved turned into a relentless streams of criticism. Even her supporters began to distance themselves, unwilling to associate with what was now seen as an impulsive, harmful act. When Christina finally released her public apology, it was met with mixed reactions. Some praised her for taking responsibility, others dismissed it as damage control, but the damage was done. As for Thomas Garner, he returned to his quiet life, knowing he had handled the situation with the dignity and restraint befitting his station. He hoped the incident would serve as a lesson, not just for Christina, but for anyone tempted to let anger override reason. Christina, meanwhile, found herself isolated and facing the reality of her actions. The world she once controlled with a tap of her screen had turned against her, leaving her to reflect on the consequences of her choices. What would you do in Thomas Garner's place? Would you handle it with the same calm and dignity, or take a different approach? Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you or someone you know faced a similar situation? Let us know how it turned out. Don't forget to like and share this story if it resonated with you. This story was created to highlight an important issue and inspire positive change. Together we can make the world a better place. Your opinion matters.